At the crack of dawn, Sarah Monroe fired up her Freightliner Cascadia, the roar of the engine breaking the silence of the empty truck stop. What seemed like an ordinary day on the road was about to turn into a life-or-death battle. A cargo worth millions, a long highway ahead, and a group of dangerous men tracking her every move. It was supposed to be just another delivery to Dallas. But Sarah, known as Valkyrie on the road, had faced much worse in her past. Her military training wasn't just a badge. It was the difference between life and death. When 3 armed men tried to force her off the road, Sarah didn't panic. She fought back. But would she survive? You won't believe how this brave woman turned the tables and taught these criminals a lesson they'll never forget. Don't miss a second of this incredible story. Hit that subscribe button now and stay with us to the end. This is Acts of Kindness Stories. And today, Sarah's story is one you can't afford to miss. Sarah Monroe knew the road better than anyone. As the engine of her Freightliner Cascadia roared to life, she took a deep breath and surveyed the empty parking lot around her. The morning sun had just begun to stretch across the desert landscape, and Sarah was focused. She had a mission ahead. Another 800 miles to Dallas. The weight of her cargo, $2 million worth of electronic components, wasn't something most people could fathom. But Sarah had been driving big rigs for years. Before becoming an independent trucker, she had served in the military, where she had driven armored vehicles in combat zones like Afghanistan and Iraq. It was that same meticulous attention to detail, honed on the battlefield, that made Sarah exceptional at her job. She didn't just drive, she prepared. Every move, every route, every checkpoint was planned and double-checked. Her military training had taught her to be hyper-aware of her surroundings. It was second nature now. As she completed her usual pre-trip checklist, her mind was already on the road ahead. She'd driven this stretch 1,000 times before. Still, she couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling in the pit of her stomach. She shook it off. It was just nerves from a long haul. Another 800 miles, Sarah muttered to herself, tightening her grip on the wheel. She adjusted the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of her own tired eyes, the streaks of silver beginning to show in her short blonde hair. She had spent years on the road, often isolated, but it had given her the space she needed to heal. The road was where she found herself. But as Sarah pulled out of the truck stop and hit the open road, she had no idea that this particular journey would push her to the edge in ways she hadn't prepared for. Hours into the drive, Sarah's radio crackled to life with a familiar voice. "Morning, Valkyrie. How's the weather out there?" It was Brown Bear, another trucker she'd often spoken with on the CB. "Clear skies and open road, Brown Bear. On my way to Dallas. You take care out there, reports of truck robberies." She clicked off the radio, her hand steady on the wheel as she cruised down Interstate 10. Her mind wandered for a moment, thinking of her mother back in Michigan. The thought of the blue house by the lake, the place that had always felt like home, reminded her of the things she'd left behind. But there was no time for distractions, not now. She had a delivery to make, and she was determined to get it done without issue. But as Sarah crossed the border into New Mexico, something didn't feel right. She stopped at a small diner in Las Cruces to grab a quick bite. It was a quiet place, mostly frequented by other truckers, but today, a group of 3 men caught her attention. They didn't look like the typical road crew. Too well-dressed, too polished. Something about their behavior was off. They spoke quietly among themselves, occasionally glancing in her direction. Sarah's instincts kicked in. She finished her meal, paid the bill, and left. Back at her truck, she felt their eyes on her. Her senses heightened as she slid into the cab. Everything seemed normal, until she saw the black SUV parked near her truck. The 3 men from the diner were standing by it, pretending to inspect her rig. Sarah's heart rate increased, but her expression remained calm. She approached them with her keys firmly in hand. "May I help you, gentlemen?" she asked. The tallest of the men, with graying temples, turned toward her. He gave a slow smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Admiring your truck, ma'am. It's a beautiful Freightliner." "Thanks," Sarah replied, keeping her distance. But I need to hit the road. As she climbed into the cab and started the engine, Sarah noticed them moving back to their SUV. But something about their actions didn't sit right with her. She kept an eye on them in the rearview mirror as she pulled out of the rest area. The black SUV followed, maintaining a steady distance. For the next hour, Sarah's instincts were on high alert. The SUV was still behind her, and she had no intention of letting them get any closer. She switched on the radio, her voice calm but alert. "Brown Bear, do you copy? This is Valkyrie. I've got unwanted company. Black SUV, 3 men. They've been following me since Las Cruces. Copy that, Valkyrie. Stay sharp. I'm about 30 minutes ahead. I'll pull over at the next rest area and wait for you." Sarah didn't feel entirely at ease, but she appreciated the backup. It wasn't enough just to have backup though. She needed to be ready. Under her seat, she checked her Glock 19. Legal, registered, and loaded. Just in case. For the next several miles, Sarah watched the rearview mirror, knowing the SUV was still tailing her. They were patient, waiting for the right moment to make their move. Sarah's gut told her it wouldn't be much longer before they tried something. She wasn't wrong. Passing through a construction zone, Sarah noticed the SUV speed up. The passenger window rolled down, and she saw a gun pointed in her direction. "Pull over now," the man shouted. For a moment, Sarah didn't move, as if considering his order. In truth, she was calculating her options. The rest area where Brown Bear had planned to stop was still too far away. The road was empty. There was no one else around. Then, without warning, she slammed the accelerator. The Freightliner roared to life, surging forward. The SUV matched her speed, staying close. Sarah knew her truck wasn't the fastest on the road, but it had mass and stability. It wasn't about outrunning them, it was about outsmarting them. She waited until the SUV was right beside her and made a sudden, sharp move to the right. The maneuver was enough to force the SUV into the shoulder, throwing off its driver. Sarah took the chance and widened the gap. The SUV regained control, but it was clear now they weren't just going to let her go. They had a plan, and Sarah needed to stick to hers. The rest area was close, just a few kilometers away. Sarah was about to make a break for it when the SUV pulled ahead, cutting her off. They slowed, trying to force her to stop. Sarah could see it, she had one shot at this. With a quick glance, she swerved sharply into the exit lane. The SUV reacted, but not fast enough. The driver had to slam on the brakes, skidding to avoid hitting the concrete barrier. Sarah didn't slow down. She raced toward the rest area, praying she could make it. She parked quickly and jumped out of the truck, running toward the diner, where several truckers were eating. As she reached the door, she spotted Brown Bear, a large man with a thick beard, standing up to greet her. "Frank," she called. "Those guys in the SUV, they followed me here." Frank stood tall. His presence alone enough to make the men outside take notice. "I saw you coming in hot. Is that them?" He gestured toward the window where the SUV's occupants were now standing. "Yeah," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "They tried to force me off the road. They're armed." Frank nodded, turning to a couple of other truckers. "Joe, get on the radio. We've got a situation." Within minutes, a group of 5 truckers had gathered around Sarah. They made it clear they weren't about to let anyone mess with one of their own. The diner waitress, a stern-faced woman, stepped up. "Should I call the police?" Sarah hesitated. She had mixed feelings about involving authorities. After years of military service, she didn't always trust those who hadn't shared the same experiences. But this time was different. "Yes," Sarah said finally. "Tell them we've got an armed robbery in progress." The men in the SUV noticed the growing group of truckers. A brief discussion ensued, and then they got back in the vehicle. Without a word, they sped off into the night. Frank immediately noted the license plate number, knowing it would help track them down. Less than 20 minutes later, the police arrived. Officer Brian Thompson, a middle-aged man with a steady demeanor, listened as Sarah, Frank, and the other drivers recounted the events. "You sure they were armed?" he asked, taking notes. I saw a gun, Sarah answered firmly. They pointed it right at me. The officer nodded, but his tone softened when he learned Sarah's background. The army, huh? My son's in the 1st Cavalry over at Fort Hood. The tension in the room lightened a bit. Officer Thompson now saw Sarah not just as a trucker, but as someone who understood how to handle herself under pressure. I'll get the word out to patrols, Officer Thompson said. We've had reports of similar robberies along this route. Before he left, Officer Thompson looked over at Frank. She's in good hands. Let's keep an eye on her. As Sarah prepared to continue her journey, Frank and several other truckers offered to escort her. They would travel in a convoy, with Sarah's rig safely in the middle. The road was dangerous, but now she wasn't alone. It was a long night. The convoy traveled together, each trucker looking out for the others. But just as they neared Texas, Sarah noticed headlights closing in fast. It was the same black SUV. This time things were different. The men were armed with a rifle, and they were desperate. Sarah wasn't about to let them take her down. She trusted her training, and she wasn't backing down. The chase was on again. As the convoy of trucks roared down the highway, Sarah's grip tightened on the wheel. The black SUV wasn't backing down. It was coming for her, and this time they were armed with a rifle. The air was tense, but Sarah didn't flinch. She knew what had to be done. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was calm, focused. Every instinct she had learned in combat came rushing back. She wasn't just a trucker. She was a warrior, and she had faced far worse than this. The SUV closed in on her, the driver positioning the vehicle beside hers, the passenger window rolling down to reveal the man aiming the rifle. Stop now or I'll shoot, he screamed. But Sarah wasn't stopping, not now. Not ever. With a quick maneuver, she slammed on the brakes, swerving the truck to the side. The SUV driver tried to cut her off, but Sarah was faster, sharper. The heavy freightliner bounced, but she kept control. Then, in a flash, she made her move. With one swift motion, she turned the wheel hard, crashing the side of her truck into the smaller vehicle. The SUV veered off the road, flipping end over end before coming to a halt in a twisted heap of metal. The convoy came to a screeching stop. Sarah's breath came in shallow bursts as she checked the rearview mirror. The threat was neutralized. But she knew better than to let her guard down just yet. The other truckers quickly surrounded her, making sure the danger had passed. Frank was the first to check on her. Are you okay? You look fine, but you've been through hell, he said. His voice low but filled with concern. I'm good, Sarah replied, her voice steady. She was exhausted, shaken, but alive. As the sound of sirens drew closer, Sarah's mind raced. The police arrived soon after, and the scene was chaos as officers swarmed the wreckage. The surviving robber, the man with the graying temples, was trapped in the driver's seat. He glared at Sarah, blood dripping from his forehead. You're crazy, he spat, his voice hoarse with pain. No, Sarah replied, her calm voice cutting through the tension. I'm not crazy. I'm just trying to survive. The man coughed, weakly muttering, the load. It's worth millions, before losing consciousness. As the police worked through the aftermath, Sarah knew this wasn't just about surviving a robbery. This was about something much bigger, standing up for herself and her community. The criminals were part of a larger ring of truck robbers who had terrorized drivers across the region. Today, Sarah had made sure they wouldn't harm anyone else. The police confirmed that the men were involved in a string of high-value cargo thefts, but Sarah didn't care much about their criminal past. What mattered was that she had protected herself, her cargo, and the other drivers on the road. The officers were quick to acknowledge her bravery. You did what you had to do, ma'am, Sheriff Tanner said. This is clearly self-defense. After everything had settled, Sarah climbed back into her truck, ready to finish what she had started. She received support from her fellow truckers, Frank, Joe, and the others. They had her back just like she had theirs. And even though Sarah had always been independent, she realized something that afternoon. she wasn't alone on the road anymore. The truckers' community had become her family. She finished the last leg of her journey to Dallas, delivering the goods on time despite the chaos. But the real victory was that she had not only defended herself but also proven to herself that her past didn't define her. She had learned to use her scars as strength, and now she was helping others who had been through similar struggles. Months later, Sarah created a defensive driving training program for high-value cargo drivers, sharing her military and trucker experience to keep others safe. The incident on the road became a legend among truckers, but Sarah didn't care about the fame. What mattered was that fewer drivers were falling victim to robberies. She had turned her pain and trauma into something meaningful. One fall afternoon, Sarah parked her Freightliner in front of the blue house by the lake in Michigan. Her mother greeted her with a tight embrace. "You look different," she said, studying Sarah's face. "I am different," Sarah replied with a smile. That night, Sarah sat on the porch, watching the lake shimmer in the moonlight. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, on the battles she had fought and won, and on the lessons learned on the open road. She wasn't just a survivor, she was stronger than ever. This is what true resilience looks like. Sarah had found healing in the most unlikely of places, in her scars, in her strength, and in the unwavering bond she now shared with those around her. The road was no longer just a place to escape. It had become her home. If Sarah's story moved you, if it made you realize the strength we all carry inside, then share this video. Like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe to Acts of Kindness Stories. We're getting closer to 10,000 subscribers, and we'd love for you to be a part of our growing community. These are the stories that show us the power of human strength, courage, and kindness. Let's keep spreading the message.